I'd like to show you how to install the HORNET Playbook on a virtual private server. I'm going to use HeadSnare. You can find the HORNET Playbook on GitHub. I'll share the link. You can also Google HORNET Playbook and I'm sure you're going to find this page. And as you can see, there are all kind of requirements, recommendations, everything is pretty much written here. We'll go over some of the topics here. I'd like to show you what the HORNET Playbook does and how simple it is to install it. I'm going to use MobaXterm in order to SSH into my virtual private server, VPS. You can also use PuTTY, or you can use command line if you're using Linux or Mac or even on Windows. I've also generated SSH keys. I won't touch the topic here, but basically if you create a virtual private server by any hosting, you will probably get the root password. I prefer to use SSH keys as that's more safe. Also, first step would be to create a VPS. I'm going to select Ubuntu latest. I think this is a pretty decent machine. I've been working with this for a very long time and they perform very well. As you see, I have already imported my SSH keys and I can just give this. I already have one Hornet running, so I'll just give it number 2 and I'll click on create. This really takes a few seconds. Sorry. And I'm going to copy the IP address, which actually I already have it configured here, but anyway. So it is already running. I just got this warning because previously I've connected to the same IP address and now it is a new VPS and it has a different signature fingerprint, so I'll just ignore this. And I'm authenticated, and let me increase so it is easier to see what is going on. So once I have the shell, I can verify that I'm the root user, and basically it's, or let's say generally, it's not advised to work as the root user, but for the purpose of this video I will. Normally you would create an admin user, one who has sudo privileges, and you'd completely disable root access via SSH to your server as part of security hardening. And let's go over here to installation. Not for development, I need the normal installation command. So all this sudo stuff here was written in order to make sure that it would also work for a normal user, but it doesn't matter. I can just copy this, Control C, right click or Shift Insert, and this will fire up the installer. So it's going to do a bunch of stuff. It's going to upgrade all the packages on the system. It's going to install all kind of dependencies. It's going to install Ansible. Ansible is the configuration management software that is used by the HORNET Playbook. Ansible has a concept called playbooks, and playbooks are simply manifest with instructions, what should be configured and how a server should be configured. And that's what is being used here, as you can see. Sorry. So this doesn't take too long. I believe that HeadSnare maintains their Ubuntu images up to date, so probably periodically they upgrade all the packages on it. So when you end up installing a new VPS, it doesn't have too many packages to install. So we've reached the installation options window, and you can see that some defaults have already been chosen. The entire playbook is based on Docker, and Docker is awesome. It helps you not to clutter the system, the host system, with packages directly installed on it. It runs in containers. Basically, it utilizes the kernel namespace features and makes it very easy to upgrade and to maintain software. and ship software. It's going to install Nginx, which is a web server, and we're using this as a reverse proxy in order to access things like the dashboard with authentication and rate limits, a little bit security in mind. And we have HA proxy, and HA proxy is used specifically for the API/wallet port. And that's for a reason that it has a lot of options in it to help protect and help make decisions about the requests that have reached the node and how to act upon those. I wouldn't skip firewall config, because one of the nice features of the playbook is that it installs for you the firewall and helps secure the server. We could choose to immediately bootstrap this node as a COMNET. If we don't enable this, we're going to be immediately configured for the mainnet. But we can do this later. I'm going to show later on how you can switch your node from COMNET and back to mainnet. And we would like to keep monitoring. Monitoring does require a little bit more resources from your node. So if you have a very low-end node, maybe it is a good idea to disable monitoring. So I'll go ahead with the defaults. And now I'm requested to enter a username and password. This username and password are going to be used to access anything from the dashboards, basically the dashboards and Grafana and such. So the installation, this is the Ansible playbook installation. Using the options we've provided that it starts configuring the node. And this is going to take, I think, about 10 minutes last time I checked. So probably skipping this part so you don't need to sit and... Welcome back. Well, this didn't take too long, about 7 minutes, and the node is ready. I have this installation done screen pointing to the log, and we have the addresses of the dashboard and of Grafana for viewing some metrics dashboards. One note about the IP address: because I'm using a VPS, this is actually the IP address directly of the VPS. If you are working inside your local LAN, you might end up having your internal address, and this won't be accessible from outside your network. So just take note of that. You might have to forward ports on your router. There is a full list of ports over here. These are the internal ports that are listening inside the on the host itself, and these are the ports that will be exposed outwards. Some ports are always exposed outwards. For example, the auto peering is always exposed. You will have to forward this on your router, and the peering port, you'll have to forward this on your router as well. Later on, we are going to enable this port, which allows us to access the API or the wallet, and you'll also have to forward this port on your router. And when we enable the certificate, when we request a certificate, we also need to make sure that port 80 is forwarded on the router. So if you're using a virtual private server, this is much easier. If you're using something like AWS, you might have to configure security rules in order to allow any of these ports access to these ports. So what is happening in the background? Hornet already started working. When it starts up for the first time, it's going to download the snapshot, and that might take a while. So if you were very quick to open this address, you might end up with a message 502 bad gateway. Don't worry about that. You just need to wait a little bit. Actually, what we can do is view the Hornet log. And by the way, this command is also written over here. If we go to control Hornet, there's a bunch of commands you can run on the command line to view the status, to restart, to start the node, etc. And as you can see, it is already running. If I view the beginning of the log, you'll see that it has been busy with the snapshot. During this time, it doesn't respond to API calls, and the dashboard isn't running yet. And you see only afterwards everything starts working. So during this time, Don't panic, it's just busy with a snapshot and it will start up. So you can always look at the log if you're impatient like I am. Okay, let's take this address. I lost that screen, so I can just look up for my main IP address using IP-4 array or IPA to show also the IPv6 address. I'll take this, put it in the browser and put the dashboard's address. So what is going to happen? We are putting HTTPS, and this means that this connection is secure. The HORNET Playbook has generated the self-signed certificate. It isn't recognized, it doesn't match the IP, so we're going to get a warning. Firefox is pretty okay with this. It allows you to proceed and accept this risk. I think that some browsers might be less happy about letting you to proceed. For example, I think it was Chrome or Brave on a Mac. So you can either use Firefox, or what we're going to do later on is generate a certificate and have a valid certificate, in which case you won't have these troubles and you can just enter a domain name here. So we can see the dashboard is working. We can view the neighbors. We have HORNET has integrated the Tango Explorer and Visualizer into the dashboard, so it makes it very handy. Everything under one hood. And I can head over to Grafana, that's port 555. As you can see, you can check the ports if you forgot that. And I will get this warning again because it sees a new port and it thinks this might be a different site. And sometimes you're requested to enter the password. I think I had it cached for the dashboard, and that's why I didn't ask for the user and password. This is the user and password you've entered during the installation. So if everything is okay, we should have here a few default dashboards. For example, HORNET produces metrics. This is being scraped by an application called Prometheus, and Grafana is the one that reads Prometheus metrics and displays it in this manner. We have here different dashboards. For example, very detailed information about your node. You have here all kind of graphs and dashboards about networking, about the disk, about memory. So it gives you a good insight about your node's performance over time. Just started collecting the data since this time, so I think after a day or two you can just choose how many days to display and the refresh rate, so you'll see the data being produced here. Okay, let's see, next thing I would like to show you a tool called ERITOP. This is a Python tool that works similarly a little bit to HTOP. HTOP shows you information about the system life, about how much memory is being used, the CPU utilization, the processes, etc. And ERITOP is specifically been written for ERI, but it uses the same API calls. HORNET has the same API calls, so we can actually use it for HORNET. And we can see the neighbors here, and we can see the milestones, and we are synced or not, etc. And the next tool, NBCTL. Auto peering is being enabled by default. It is recommended to have at least 1 or 2 static peers in addition. So NBCTL is also a Python tool that helps us add and remove neighbors more easily, because the alternative would be to configure everything in the JSON file, and that's not too friendly, because if you have a look here, I would have to add here the peer, and I need to make sure that my syntax is valid, and you might forget the comma, and then things don't work properly. So it's much easier to use a tool on the command line. So -a for add, the neighbor is called, I'll just take my server, and it has added the neighbor. I can also list neighbors. It will show JSON output, and yeah, you can see it has been added. There is no connectivity because I didn't add it on this server. So anyway, we can remove it. Just switch to R and remove neighbors. Okay, next tool is HORNET controller, or HORC in short. And this utility allows you to do a bunch of stuff. Let's go over most of the items. Update HORNET software. We're currently running the latest. The playbook will always install the latest official release. And if there is any update, official update, you see a notification here, and you can use this in order to upgrade. We can manage plugins. So, as you know, some have been enabled by default, Prometheus and auto peering, and later on we'll switch on monitoring and graph. We can manage services, not too many here. I can, for example, HORNET as watch the status, start, stop, restart, disable on startup, view the log. So instead of running command line commands, if you don't like that, you can use this menu-driven tool. I can configure files, for example, HORNET's main configuration, neighbors, etc. You should know what you're doing, because if you have any syntax errors, HORNET might not start up and will panic with an error. Just a utility to see which processes are using the most memory. Press Q to exit. I can rerun the playbook installation. If anything broke, you can choose to rerun this. You have an option to overwrite all the files, so if you messed up any of the files, don't worry, you can just rerun the entire playbook and it will regenerate the configuration files for you. Clean unused Docker images. We are using Docker, and every time you upgrade software or if you build images on your host system, a lot of Docker images, or we call them dangling images, they are not related to anything, they're not used, you can clean them up using this command. We can update this utility. You will also get a notification if this utility has any update, and some other node scripts that are in charge of managing different things. For example, the certificate requests run by a script. HA proxy access. So HA proxy, let's head over to the ports, and I would like to explain a few words about this. Ports. So we have our HORNET API. It's listening internally on this port. As you can see, I can use this utility, and we see that HORNET is listening. This is an internal IP. You can never access this from outside, and it's listening on this port. So I can only access it here from this node. For example, it will return some invalid command because I'm not really sending anything more than what you call a get. So we can see it does work, because if I enter some random port, you see nothing is listening on this port, so you get connection refused. Okay, back to here. What we are going to do, what we can do in order to gain accessibility to this port is enable this port. This port is going to be handled by HA proxy, and HA proxy is going to encrypt all the communication. So when you connect from your Trinity wallet or from a different system using curl or whatever programming language, it will connect to this port using HTTPS, and this is going to be forwarded internally to this address. At the moment, this is not accessible. So if I go over here, this will just time out. Okay, and obviously number 5 I cannot use because it is only listening locally. So this is what this option allows you, to enable the access. However, I would like to do a little bit more than that and enable that while enabling a HTTPS certificate. And what is that for? If you have a domain, you can generate a certificate with Let's Encrypt, and this domain will point to the IP address, and that way you can access the node without all that certificate warnings, etc. And you can put a more friendly name here to work with. So we'll get back to this in a second. I can just see the node information. This is a direct call to the API. I can show the latest milestone. I actually have a service on the XVPS server that queries a bunch of HORNET and Erie nodes, and it gets it tries to determine what is the most commonly seen latest milestone index, and that's what it presumes is the last one, and we can see that this node matches, so we are in sync. Get a new snapshot DB. If you delete your database, HORNET will do this for you, but you can also force this process to happen. This is the URL that is currently used by HORNET internally, so you can just force it to happen, or you can provide your own URL. If I choose this, I will be able to enter another URL, so if you want to download it from somewhere else, that's possible. Neighbors, or the better name, peers. Here I can also manage neighbors. This is the list of the auto-peered neighbors, but I can also add a static one, same as we've done on the command line. This actually uses the tool nbctl in the background. It added the neighbor. I can list it, it's here. And if it's a misbehaving neighbor and I'm fed up, I can throw him away. So far so good, don't need to mess with any JSON files. Makes it very easy to work with. I can access Eritop from here, and I think last I'll show you how to switch the node to ComNet. Just by choosing this, it will switch the node from working on the mainnet to the ComNet. Okay, so what do we know about this node? We know that this is my IP address, and if you use services like HeadSnare, most of the providers also have a static DNS name that binds to this IP address. I can do a reverse query using the tool dig, and this shows up this generated address, and you can do dig on this. Whoops, short makes it a little bit friendlier, and you can see that this indeed points to the IP of this node. I can use this name in order to generate a certificate. It isn't the nicest cosmetically, and also entering this is kind of horrible, but if you don't have any provider for DNS and you cannot set up a DNS name anywhere, you can use this. I've already configured the following name. As you can see, so I'm going to work with this name for this node. So go back to here, enable HTTPS. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to expose this port and going to make sure traffic to this port is going to reach the API from HORNET. And the next question, would I allow attach to Tangle to run PO on this node? And yes, I would like to. So it's busy reconfiguring, and in a second we're going to test this port here. So one thing to note, it is not installing a certificate yet. The first step for it is to make sure that this port is available externally. Reconfiguring HA proxy, restarting. Excellent. So before we continue, I'd like to show you this, and obviously because I'm using the IP address, self-signed certificate, doesn't match the name, etc., I would have to accept. So this for me is an indication that it is working. This is a response from HA proxy. The reason I get a forbidden is because I'm accessing through the browser. This is not a proper request. This is called a GET request, and it doesn't send any extra parameters. The API expects. HA proxy doesn't even forward invalid request to HORNET. So anyway, don't panic about this. This is the way it should be, and we know it's working because it's responding and not timing out. The next thing I would like to do is request a valid certificate for my domain, and you can enter any email you want, it really doesn't matter, and click in the name. Okay, would you like to configure this certificate for Nginx? So the first thing it's going to do is configure this certificate for HA proxy for the port 14267, but I can also configure it for all the dashboards, which I think it's really nice and handy. So we're going to do that. And you see it's using port 80 in order to run the verification to Let's Encrypt. So if you have router at home, you need to make sure that you're forwarding port 80 TCP to your node. And this is a VPS, so it just made sure that the IP tables allow this traffic, and this worked. I have a new certificate, and this port wasn't open before, so it makes sure to disable it. If you already had the port open, it would not have disabled it for you, so that's nice. And now the playbook is reconfiguring the node to start use the certificates. So I can go over here and put the name, and I get the same response, and the difference is that now the connection is secure. I can view the certificate, and you see it has been issued for this node. There is a process called the cron job on the node that makes sure that your certificate will get auto renewed before it gets expired, so you don't need to worry about this anymore. And I can also access Grafana, and you see connection is secure. I can access the dashboard. Okay, you might be asked for your password if it hasn't been cached already, but anyway, using domain name, the port, and connection is secure, so that's perfect. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's head on to plugins. What I would like to show you is enabling of the standalone monitor and graph. And it's asking me if to restart Hornet. In order for it to load the plugins, it has to be restarted. So what it has done in the background is added the config.json and move the plugins. I'll show you this. So this entire configuration file is managed by the playbook, and these two plugins, Graph and Monitor, were in this list, and what it has done, it moved them down here and restarted Hornet. I can use this tool to watch what ports are listening, and we have some new ports here. And it's easier if we head on to here and see, okay, we've enabled the visualizer, and it is going to be on port 8083 externally. Let's try that. Yep, so this is working. And we can try the monitor. Okay, one thing. This is the API port. So what I would like to mention about this, one thing I've noticed, if you are not using a valid certificate, when you access the monitor on this port, it is also going to access this under the hood, and then it doesn't accept the certificate for here. So you would first have to go to here, accept the certificate, and then go back to here. Since I'm using a domain name with a valid certificate, there is no problem, and after a few seconds you start getting data. Okay, next we can switch these plugins off. And we can switch our node to work on ComNet. So it detects that my node is currently running on mainnet and asks me if I want to switch. It stops Hornet, it changes a few variables for the configuration template, regenerates the configuration file, and it starts up Hornet. It also removed all the database, because a database that was on mainnet, it will not work with the ComNet, so it basically refreshes that. So one way we can ensure we are on ComNet, see the node has been restarted. You see that the snapshot file has been downloaded for one that fits the ComNet. The coordinator address is the one from ComNet, and this node is currently running on ComNet. And Similarly, I can just go here and switch it back to mainnet. Same idea, stop HORNET, remove the database, regenerate the configuration file, and start up HORNET again. Okay, a few last words about node security. You've noticed I've been working as a root user, and this is just a test virtual private server, and I'm gonna delete it after this demo. If you're intending on keeping your node to work, let's call it production, I'd really recommend you visit some security advices. For example, disable root access with SSH. I've written a guide long time ago for Erie, but this works for any Linux server. So just head on here to show you how to generate SSH keys, how to disable password authentication, how to create a user with which you can run administrative commands on your server. Use alternative port for SSH. By default it uses 22, so by using an alternative port it reduces the amount of brute force attempts. Although it doesn't really matter if you're using SSH keys, it's very unlikely somebody would ever manage to access your server. So please, by all means, go over this and make sure you secure your node. That's it. I'd like to thank you for watching. Thank you for using the HORNET Playbook. If you have any questions, you can find me on Discord, the HORNET channel. My alias is Nuriel77. Just write it here. And just tag me if you have any questions, anything I can help. Feel free. Thank you very much.